Hello, today our discussion is on Chapter 4, which is on tissues. And tissues are grouped into 4 different types, and these 4 types make up everything that we are composed of as humans. Epithelium, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue. As you look at this picture, you can see that nervous tissue includes brain, spinal cord, nerves. Tissue includes skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Epithelium forms boundaries between the environment, between the internal and external environment, lines and coats organs in general. Connective tissue supports, binds other tissues. It includes bones, tendons, fats, other padding tissue, and blood is also classified as a connective tissue. Epithelial tissue is classified according to location. Covering or external covering and lining epithelium, and then glandular epithelium. And glands actually secretory tissue. Epithelial tissue, the cells all have polarity. That's an upside and a downside, a definite shape. And the apical surface, we could call it top or the bottom, but it's could be upside down or right side up. But it may bear microvilli, the brush border, cilia, but it is what it's named for, and how many layers also tells us how it's named. The apical layer is as opposed to the non-cellular basal lamina of the tissue. So here we have the basal layer and the apical layer. Of course, this is not tissue, this is castle. Now we could name this tissue. We name them for how many layers, and if they're one layer, we say it's simple. 2 layers, we call it stratified. I'd say there's multiple layers here, so it would be stratified castle epithelium. Of course, that's imaginary, but it works. Epithelial tissue is composed of continuous sheets, and they're held together by tight junctions and desmosomes, whereas many other tissues may have a lot of non-cellular components. Epithelium is strictly cellular, plus it has a basal laminae underneath this, which is reticular connective tissue. Epithelium is avascular, and it's innervated. It regenerates rapidly. Now, to classify, is it a single layer or is it stratified, more than one layer? Then this is one layer, so simple, stratified here. Now, types of epithelium. We have squamous, cuboidal, and columnar, and they're named according to the apical layer of the cells. Now, as you look at this, it's one of those kind of things in anatomy that actually makes sense. Squamous epithelium is somewhat squashed in shape. Cuboidal epithelium is cube shape, and columnar epithelium is in the form of columns. We're also going to talk about epithelium, just an overview on specific types based on description, function, and location. This is a single layer of simple squamous epithelium. This is actually lung tissue right here, and this would be the air sacs or alveoli. And as you see, the epithelial tissue surrounds those alveoli. And since it's a simple layer, it's easy for oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse across this simple layer. And then the vessels, the capillaries that are surrounding this, pick it up. And you get oxygen going into the bloodstream and CO2 leaving the bloodstream. Other layers of simple squamous epithelium, the endothelium. This is the lining of lymphatic vessels, blood vessels in the heart. And this is going to be used, this term, endothelium, will be used over and over again without further explanation. So you might just want to remember that term. Mesothelium is epithelium of serous membranes in the ventral body cavity. Here we have some cuboidal epithelium, little cube shapes here, as you can see. And these are actually simple cube shapes right through here. This is in the kidney. Now this is simple columnar. As you see, here is your basal surface. This is your apical surface. Again, basal surface, apical surface. So it's simple columnar epithelium. Pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Sounds like a lot of words, but it's not if you look at the word together. Pseudo means false. Stratified means stacked, column-shaped, and then epithelium. If you look at these closely, which you really can't tell because of the cross sections, but you can from the picture over here, each cell goes all the way down to the basement membrane. So even though it appears to be stacked, it's not. Many of these will have cilia on the outside. We should have a picture here of the trachea. The trachea is lined with pseudostratified columnar epithelium, ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. And the cilia moves things that you don't need in your lungs, such as dust particles, smoke residue, gnats, continuously moves them up out of the lungs. Stratified squamous epithelium, it's a thick membrane. Now, if you don't want to memorize what epithelium is where, think about what's the thickest. This is going to be the thickest epithelium. Now, the layers here at the bottom are fat and round. But since you only get nutrients going up through here from the basement of it, the connective tissue underlying surface, you only get nutrients going in this way and waste products going by simple diffusion. The cells, as they grow and they move farther and farther from that nutrient surface, they die. And you end up with a very thick surface that's waterproofed. And anywhere in the body that you need a thick, thick layer, stratified squamous epithelium is going to be the preferred type. Skin is made of this. Tissues in your mouth are made of this. Stratified cuboidal, we really don't have much of in the human, maybe in some mammary gland sections or sweat gland sections. Stratified columnar, only going to be is you're in your transitional areas, is you're between one type of epithelium to another, and it's only going to be for a very short distance, very rare. This is transitional epithelium. Transitional epithelium has been voted the #1 reason to take a break class because it lines your urinary bladder. And in the urinary bladder, when you don't need to go, the cells are very poofy and round. And then as the bladder fills up, they become squamated, also known as squashed. Then when you urinate, they pop back up. So they basically transition between flat when you gotta go and round when you don't gotta go. Glands secrete. So glandular epithelium is a cell that secretes things in aqueous fluid. And it may be one cell or maybe more than one cell. And we classify them by where they release their stuff. Endocrine glands secrete their product into the bloodstream. Exocrine glands secrete their product into ducts that go to specific areas. Now, the only unicellular gland that we describe in the human is the goblet cell, which is in the gut between some of the epithelial cells to apply mucus. And that's just one example of where it is. Okay, endocrine are ductless glands. They secrete hormones that travel throughout the bloodstream and target specific organs. Exocrine glands secrete stuff into ducts, and then they're released either on the skin, body cavities, and this could be mucus, sweat, oil, salivary glands. The unicellular, only known unicellular gland is the goblet cell, and it secretes mucus into the intestines and respiratory system. And this is a picture of someone's conception of a goblet cell. Now, multicellular exocrine glands, they're going to have ducts and secretory units. The duct may be simple or compound, and we also look at the structure of their secretory units. They may be tubular, alveolar, or tubulo-alveolar. When we come over to this page, this is simple tubular. This is simple branched tubular, so they're tube-shaped, whereas this is simple alveolar, it's round. Simple branched alveolar. Now here we have compound tubular. They're tube-shaped, and they have many branches coming together from and they connect into one common duct system. Compound alveolar, such as mammary glands, are alveolar and have branches, and they come together here. And then we have in the salivary glands, compound tubulo-alveolar. Some are tubular, some are alveolar. Now, mode of secretion. This is merocrine or holocrine. Now, in a merocrine gland, products are secreted by exocytosis. The pancreas, sweat, and salivary glands are good examples. Holocrine, the actual cell must rupture. Sebaceous or oil glands are a good example. So if you can't remember this, remember the merocrine gland secretes its substance and then it goes about its merry way. See, that's a happy cell. Whereas the holocrine gland secretes its structure, it actually ruptures and it dies. So it gives its whole life to producing its product. Okay, connective tissue, we're going to talk about 4 types: connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. Connective tissue proper, we have loose connective tissue. An example, post tissue. Hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Bone may be compact or spongy, and these will be discussed in much more detail in Chapter 6. And then blood is considered a connective tissue and is discussed in Chapter 17. Major functions of connective tissue: binding and support, protection, insulation. Fat insulates you. That's why a whale can swim in icy water and be perfectly comfortable, whereas we would freeze to death in just a few minutes. And then transportation, that is the bloodstream. Okay, they all have some things in common and then a lot of things that are not in common. They all come from mesenchyme in the early embryonic tissue. Varying degrees of vascularity. Bone is very vascular. You break a bone, it's going to bleed. It's also going to have a better chance of healing because of that vascularity. Cartilage does not have vessels, so it gets its nutrients by simple diffusion, and you'll find that it's not going to be easy for it to heal. In connective tissue, you're going to have cells, but a non-living extracellular matrix, which has ground substance and fibers. The ground substance is the medium through which solutes diffuse between the blood capillaries and cells. It's interstitial fluid, adhesion proteins, proteoglycans, a large protein core, proteoglycans, protein core, plus large polysaccharides such as chondroitin sulfate and hyaluronic acid. And the proteoglycans trap water in various amounts. Now this takes us a little side view. Glucosamine chondroitin supplements have been shown through actual studies and published in the American Medical Association to be a good pain reliever. The disadvantage is many of these are made of shellfish, and if you're like me and allergic to shellfish, they don't work out well. Hyaluronic acid is actually used to inject into joints to increase the lubrication in that joint and decrease the arthritis pain. Okay, types of fibers. Collagen fibers. These are the strongest. They have very high tensile strength. In fact, they're strong as steel, but they're just very microscopically small. And if you have sun damage and you start to get wrinkles, it's because the collagen fibers have gone bad. Fibers give you stretchiness, and that's why your ears will pop back into place when you move them. Reticular fibers, short, highly branched collagenous fibers that are used for structure of things like maybe a lymph node. Okay, now cells of connective tissue. Mitotically active cells or secretory cells are referred to as blast cells. Mature cells, sites. So fibroblasts are in connective tissue proper, and they lay down new connective tissue. Chondroblasts are in cartilage. Chondrocytes are in cartilage. Osteoblasts and osteocytes are in bone. Hematopoietic stem cells are in bone marrow, and they make blood cells. And then we have fat cells, blood cells, white blood cells, mast cells, and macrophages also in connective tissue. Now, this is sort of a emphasis here. The word site, C-Y-T-E, and I can't write with this thing too good. That refers to cell, mature cell. The term blast is for building. An osteoblast builds up bone. Clast refers to breaking down stuff. Osteoclasts break down bone, such as if you need to release calcium into your bloodstream. And this is just a picture of a generic cell, of a generic type of connective tissue with its various cell types. Mesenchyme is the embryonic tissue that it gives rise to all connective tissues. Now we'll look at some of the different connective tissues and look at their function, location, and give a description of them. Okay, loose connective tissue, areolar, is the first we'll discuss. Gel-like matrix, 3 fiber types, has cells, fibroblasts, macrophages, mast cells, some white cells. This is for wrapping and cushioning stuff. Things like packaging organs, surrounding capillaries would be a good example of these. Now, this is adipose tissue. It's still connective tissue proper. It's fat. Adipose is fat, and all this right here is glops of fat. And when you lose weight, unfortunately, all it does is empty those cells, and then they refill. Okay, tissue, loose connective reticular tissue. This is showing you a picture of a spleen, which I hate to say doesn't look much like a spleen in real life, but there it is. And the reticular fibers are make the matrix, give the cells in the spleen, in your lymph nodes, a place to hang out. They form the stroma or the skeleton of these tissues. Dense connective tissue, regular. An example of this is going to be in tendons, ligaments, and aponeuroses, which is a sheet-like, tendon-like structure. Okay, dense connective tissue, irregular. Things like your joint capsules are going to be irregular. Elastic, dense connective tissue, elastic. The example here, you've got a lot of elastic fibers throughout it. These are elastic fibers. Your aorta, every time your heart beats, the aorta is stretched tremendously and it pops back into place, and that recoil keeps your blood pressure up to normal. Now, cartilage is the next thing we're going to talk about. hyaline cartilage. You can see you have a chondrocyte, which is a cell, a mature cartilage cell, and they're in lacuna, which is this little structure here, little area that the cells hang out in. That's your lacuna, and the cell is inside it right there. And it has a lot of non-tissue matrix. I'll put an M on the matrix. Example, costal cartilage. This is your rib cage cartilage. Also, the entire embryonic skeleton is made up of hyaline cartilage. The ends of long bones, the articular cartilage, is made up of hyaline cartilage. Okay, elastic cartilage, very similar. You still have your chondrocytes and the lacuna, but you have these elastic fibers in the matrix. Fibrocartilage, matrix similar to hyaline, but it's got a more collagen fibers, so it's very strong and good shock absorbers. Things like the discs in the knee, pubic symphysis, and your intervertebral discs. Very strong tissue. The next is bone. You don't really think of bone as being connecting stuff, but it actually does. It is a connective tissue. And we'll talk about the distinct structures of it later, but you can see you have a very organized structure with your bone, and the cells lie in these little lacuna here. And I'm afraid that was a bit of a mess up on this. Okay, there now. I'm trying to outline the whole thing. Okay, and it's hard calcified matrix. It has calcium, phosphorus, stores fat, and it's also the place where you make your red blood cells and white blood cells, hematopoiesis. Okay, blood. This is a neutrophil here. Plasma is the liquid part of blood. This is a red blood cell, a lymphocyte. This is a platelet right here. And there's a lot of things that blood does, but it transports respiratory gases, nutrients, and wastes, and other substances. It's also a major, massive part of the immune system. Okay, the nervous tissue, and this is the understatement of the century. We'll discuss it more in chapter 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. But the cells, the basic cell, the active cell of the nervous tissue is a neuron. The whole body has the nutrients. Dendrites conduct signals toward the body. Axons are long extensions, and they conduct signals away from the body out to a synapse or to an effector, which is actually a cell that does something like a muscle. This is a picture of neurons, and you can see this is the cell body here. Let me just get a hand. This is the cell body, dendrites coming in, axon, and here at the end is where your neurotransmitter is released. Okay, tissue, and we'll talk about this over and over. People say we talked about that already, but skeletal muscle is voluntary. This is what is attached to bone, and the fibers are striated or striped, and they're very long. In fact, each fiber, well, we call the cells in muscle a cell of fiber because they're so long. Of muscle fiber is the length of your entire muscle, and they're multinucleated. Now, smooth muscle is not going to be striated. This is a visceral muscle. Obviously, it's not voluntary, and this is in blood vessels and guts. You can't decide for your guts to move or not move. Cardiac muscle, same thing, not voluntary. They are striated, but they have intercalated discs, which are communications from one little short fat cell to the other. So here we have our skeletal muscles. These are our striations up through here. We have our cardiac muscle, and these are striations. These are intercalated discs. We have smooth muscle, which has no striations that are visible. Okay, skin is a cutaneous membrane, and that's what skin looks like. And we're also going to talk about epithelial membranes, the mucous membrane. And okay, the mucosa lines body cavities. The digestive tract from mouth to anus is all lined with a mucosal lining. The respiratory tract is lined with a mucosal lining. This is showing the basic example of your nose and your mouth, trachea, esophagus, stomach, all lined with mucosa. Now, serous membranes or serosa are membranes in a closed ventral body cavity. Parietal serosa lines the body walls of cells. Visceral serosa covers the organs. It is the outside layer of the organs. Viscera is parts, hearts, guts, liver, lights, and chitlins, and such things as that. This is showing a picture of the parietal pleura, lines the body chest wall. The visceral pleura covers the lung itself, and in between it is just a potential space. Okay, stages in tissue repair. Inflammation is the first stage of tissue repair. And we'll go through the individual things. Okay, inflammation. First, you have the severed blood vessels are going to bleed, and they're going to release inflammatory chemicals. Those chemicals are going to cause the vessels to become more permeable and allow white blood cells, fluid, clotting proteins, and other plasma proteins to come into the injured area, and it's going to clot, and you're going to get the formation of a scab here on the surface. This is your dermis here. Here is going to be your, well, let me try that again. Where's my eraser there? This is going to be your epidermis, just this little thin layer here. There. Okay, now, slow inflammation, since inflammation is step one of healing, you're going to slow healing. This is important to think about, because if you have a post-surgical patient and you don't control pain, or you give them NSAIDs or steroids or any anti-inflammatory drug, that could slow healing, and you have a race against time. The sutures only last a couple of weeks at best, and if you slow that healing, it's going to slow inflammation, it's going to slow healing, and you could get the stitches come out, and to put it quite crudely, their guts may fly out on the table or on the street corner. Now, the stress hormone cortisol is anti-inflammatory. So if you leave these patients in severe pain post-surgically, especially the first day, first 2 days, then you're going to slow healing. So if you have a patient, they're prescribed painkillers, be it opiate, be it whatever, they're really in pain, their blood pressure is high, you're not going to kill them with a drug, give it to them. It's a win-win situation. They heal faster, they don't suffer, and when they suffer, they make you as a nurse or other healthcare provider suffer. So just give them the drugs. They won't get addicted in a 2-day hospital stay. Okay, steps to tissue repair, the next step, organization and restored blood supply. Blood clot is going to be replaced with granulation tissue. Granulation tissue, you may have had a scab knocked off and seen some nice red tissue under that. That is granulation tissue. The epithelium begins to degenerate across it, and fibroblasts produce collagen fibers that bridge the gap and start to pull the tissue together, and then debris is phagocytized. So here you have collagen fibers here, pull tissue together. The epithelium is starting to regenerate from down here, but it will grow quickly, and once these collagen fibers bridge the gap, they're going to pull this tissue together rapidly, and the healing at this point is pretty quick. Reorganization of the blood supply takes place, and the clot is replaced by granulation tissue and a good vascular supply, where you have your collagen fibers bridging the gap. Macrophages phagocytize cell debris as well as germs in general. Surface epithelial cells multiply and migrate over granulation tissue. Now, you may have a scar left here. So when you have stretch marks, the scar you're seeing is down here in the dermal layer. The epithelium completely heals. It's the dermis that has a scar. And the final step is going to be regeneration and fibrosis. Scab attaches, epithelium thickens, normalizes. The scar is going to be in your dermis. Here we have our nice little scar down here, still showing a little scar, but it will completely regenerate, and you have a repair at this point. Okay, developmental aspects of epithelium. Okay, in the embryo, you basically have, it starts off as a little single cell organism, which is just the fused, it's a zygote, the fusion of the nuclei of the egg and sperm. Now you have your new organism called a zygote. Multiplies into a little ball called a morula. Then you get, it's differentiated until you have an embryonic disc, and it goes into layers, ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. This is early embryo. Nerve comes from ectoderm, muscle and connective tissue come from mesoderm. Epithelium actually comes from all three layers. And this is showing a 16-day-old embryo. He's not very good looking yet, but he will rapidly grow, and by the time he's 9 weeks old, he'll have all his parts, and everything he needs to go. He just won't be mature enough to survive on his own. Okay, that is all for tissues, and I'm going to talk about the